What does a mother's heartbreaking delusion about her daughter reveal about the future of artificial intelligence? The answer lies in a fascinating quirk of human brain design that's been completely overlooked by AI developers. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why this oversight could change everything we think about AI development. I'm Evan Goldstein. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a data scientist. I'm building AI Capitalist to talk to the leaders and the thinkers, like you, about how to thrive in this new world of intelligent machines.
Let me share something that happened with my daughter this week. My real daughter, not this kid on B-roll. So she was working on her math homework, and she was doing a set of multiplication problems and solving them methodically one by one. Then she looked up at me and she asked me, why do the numbers always work? So the question stopped me in my tracks, because as an engineer, my immediate instinct was to explain the logical foundations of mathematics. And that's my left brain talking, wanting to break it down into rules and patterns. But there's something deeper in her question, right? She wasn't just asking about how numbers work, she was wondering about the profound mystery of why the universe follows mathematical laws at all. Now, this moment with my daughter captures exactly what we're going to explore today, how our minds navigate the detailed analysis and the greater meaning of life. Her left brain was doing the calculations, while her right brain was searching for something larger, the wonder of mathematical truth itself. You know, it's funny because I work as an engineer and a data scientist, and I spend countless hours optimizing calculations and algorithms and fine-tuning models. But sometimes it takes a child's question to remind us that understanding how something works is only half the story. The why matters just as much. So next time we're lost in the numbers, let's take a moment to marvel at the mysteries. Because in the end, it's not about solving the problems in front of us, but about exploring the infinite possibilities beyond.
In our previous episode, we explored how brain-inspired AI models could revolutionize computing, making systems 1,000 times more efficient and capable of true learning. We discovered how the brain's cortical columns work together to process information in ways that current AI could only dream of. But there's something even more extraordinary about the brain's design, a fundamental division that could change everything we think we know about artificial intelligence. Now today, we'll explore why the brain's two hemispheres hold the key to AI's future and what happens when we ignore nature's careful balance. In 2011, a 40-year-old woman named Mary was referred for psychiatric evaluation because she believed that her 9-year-old daughter, Sarah, had been replaced by an imposter. Mary insisted that her real daughter had been taken by Child Protective Services and that the child living with her wasn't Sarah, despite the girl looking identical and knowing intimate family details about their lives. Mary would sometimes go to Sarah's school, refusing to pick her up, and then screaming, "Give me my real daughter, I know what you've done." Mary's delusion persisted, despite reassurances from healthcare providers and relatives, and she even reported seeing her real daughter being driven away in a car by unknown individuals. After evaluation, Mary was diagnosed with a delusional disorder, Capgras syndrome. What makes Mary's case particularly revealing is that damage to the left hemisphere rarely produces such profound disconnects between perception and reality. Left hemisphere injuries typically cause concrete problems like speech difficulties or motor control issues. It's damage to the right hemisphere that tends to fracture our fundamental sense of what's real and meaningful, and it offers a fascinating window into how each side of the brain contributes to our perception of reality. Now, to truly grasp this fascinating phenomenon, let's take a closer look at how each hemisphere perceives reality in its own unique way. Our brains are divided into two distinct hemispheres which are linked by a bundle of fibers, known as the corpus callosum, and it makes up about 2% of the brain's neurons. So the corpus callosum primarily plays an inhibitory role. It keeps one hemisphere from interfering with the processing that's happening in the other, which is a process known as interhemispheric inhibition. Inhibition plays a vital role in how our brains function. Each hemisphere's frontal cortex contributes to this inhibitory process. And uniquely, the prefrontal cortex can help keep the more primitive areas, like the limbic system, in check. When these layers of inhibition aren't functioning well, interesting conditions arise. Take the alien hand syndrome, for example, where a hand behaves if it has a mind of its own, or Capgras syndrome, where someone believes a look-alike has taken the place of a loved one. It's also fascinating that a healthy human brain has a unique shape. It's larger on the right at the front and on the left at the back. Now, this asymmetry is something not seen in other mammals, including our close relatives like apes and dolphins. What is nature up to here? Now, generally, the right hemisphere tends to be slightly larger. What's the role of the right side that makes it so special, and why is it important to ensure both hemispheres work independently? The right hemisphere is like our big picture thinker. It helps us make sense of the context and relationships in our lives. It processes things silently, without the need for language, understanding, or nuances of humor, music, poetry, art, metaphors, body language, and facial expressions. On the other hand, the left hemisphere focuses on the tiny details, assembling them into logical maps. It's all about rationality and the mechanics without seeing the whole picture. The left hemisphere enjoys denotative language and abstraction, provides clarity and a way to manipulate known things, as it deals with static, isolated facts. In contrast, the hemisphere embraces a vibrant world of individual, interconnected beings that are always changing. It captures the essence of lived experiences, which can be complex and sometimes elusive. For instance, when Mary experienced a loss of function in part of her right hemisphere, she struggled to grasp her own body as a whole. Now, this fundamental shift in her big picture understanding led to her insistence that her own arm didn't belong to her, a classic demonstration of left hemisphere dominance. Studies like the WADA tests and stroke research showcase how the left hemisphere can be overly confident in its conclusions, often missing larger truths the right hemisphere is able to perceive. The understanding that comes from the left hemisphere operates within a somewhat closed system. While it aims for perfection, this pursuit can sometimes feel a bit hollow and overly focused on itself. It really shines when dealing with established concepts, but it struggles to uncover new ideas or experiences. In contrast, the right hemisphere dives right into the richness of direct experiences, while the left tends to transform those experiences into ideas that we can think and talk about. What is the purpose of each hemisphere now? Watch a chameleon hunt for prey, and you'll witness an extraordinary display of divided attention. With eyes that can move independently, these remarkable reptiles can simultaneously focus one eye on a potential meal, while their other eye scans for danger. Their left eye and hemisphere concentrate on detailed tasks, like targeting insects, calculating distance, planning the precise moment to strike with their lightning-fast tongue. Meanwhile, the right eye and hemisphere maintain a broader view, monitoring the environment for approaching predators like birds or snakes. This split-brain approach isn't unique to chameleons, it's fundamental to their survival. The left hemisphere excels at precision needed for hunting. Analyzing speed, distance, and timing, the right hemisphere simultaneously processes the bigger picture, looking for changes in light, movement patterns, or anything that might signal danger. It's a perfect example of how nature has evolved specialized roles for each half of the brain. One focused on immediate tasks requiring detail and precision, the other maintaining vigilant awareness of the broader environment. Now, this clever division of responsibilities is a common theme throughout the entire brain. Across different species, you can see this split in action, even in some of the oldest lineages. For example, if you take the sea lamprey, a jawless fish that's been around for more than 500 million years, in lampreys, the right hemisphere is responsible for spatial awareness and interpreting environmental signals, and the left hemisphere is busy processing sensory information like smells. Bats, for instance, lean on their left hemisphere while hunting to navigate their way to prey using echolocation, while the right hemisphere processes the wider environmental sounds. Likewise, dolphins, manatees, and seals have a unique sleep routine, and they nap with one hemisphere of their brain awake to keep an eye on their surroundings. Even bees show this fascinating division, with their right antenna playing a key role in learning and memorizing navigation routes. What are the two sides of this debate?
Moses Maimonides, who was also known by his acronym of the Rambam, was one of Judaism's most influential philosophers and legal scholars. His works were later adopted and argued by the Catholic philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas. He lived in the 12th century, and his most famous work is called A Guide for the Perplexed. In this book, he explored how to bridge rational thinking with religious faith. The Rambam wrote about two types of divine wisdom, and expressed in Hebrew as Maaseh Bereshit and Maaseh Merkava. Maaseh Bereshit means the work of creation. It represents our understanding of the natural world through careful study and logic. Maaseh Merkava means the work of the divine chariot, and it represents the mystical understanding that goes beyond pure logic. And what's fascinating is how closely this mirrors our own modern understanding of brain hemispheres. Rambam taught that true wisdom requires both types of thinking. He said that we need the analytical mind to understand how things work, just like our left hemisphere does, but he also insisted that we need mystical awareness to grasp why things matter, just like the right hemisphere provides. Rambam warned against leaning too heavily on either approach alone. In his writings, he described how scholars who focused only on logic often became spiritually empty, and I've seen this in my own life. They could explain how the universe worked, but they couldn't find any meaning in it. These people, he said, were like someone who knew every detail about how a palace was built, but never understood why it was beautiful. On the flip side, he saw how people who pursued only mystical understanding often completely lost touch with reality. They might feel deep spiritual connections, but they couldn't engage with the practical world. Rambam compared them to people who believed they could understand a city just by looking at it from a distant mountaintop. Now, what's remarkable is how this warning from 900 years ago speaks directly to our modern AI challenge. When we build AI systems that only process information like our left hemisphere does, breaking everything down into logical pieces, we risk creating intelligence that can solve problems, but they can't understand why they matter. It's like we're building a palace architect who can calculate every measurement perfectly, but can't grasp why anyone would want to live there. Now, this hits home when we think about current AI development. Our most advanced AI systems can process massive amounts of data, and they can solve complex problems, just like the logical scholars that Rambam described. But they struggle with a kind of intuitive understanding that gives meaning to all of that data. Exactly what Rambam warned would happen when we separate these two types of wisdom and look at them independently.
Several prominent modern AI researchers share an optimistic view about creating artificial intelligence through mathematical modeling. Joschka Bach, a cognitive scientist and an AI researcher known for his work on cognitive architectures and consciousness, leads this school of thought. He's joined by Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI, for his pioneering work on deep learning and neural networks in the 1970s and 80s, and by Jan LeCun, Meta's chief AI scientist who won the Turing Award, which is computing's highest honor, along with Hinton for their groundbreaking work in deep learning. Now, these scientists believe that we can create intelligent systems by breaking down complex behaviors into simpler mathematical rules and patterns, much like breaking a complicated recipe into simple step-by-step instructions. For example, just as we can break down the process of recognizing a face into detecting edges, shapes, and features, they believe that we can break down intelligence itself into smaller, manageable pieces that we can then run through a computer that the computer can handle. Their approach suggests that when these simple mathematical rules work together in large numbers, like millions of neurons in a neural network, new and unexpected capabilities emerge, similar to how individual water molecules combine to create waves, or how individual ants create complex colony behaviors. Now, these emergent properties aren't directly programmed, but they arise naturally from the interaction of simpler parts. Hinton demonstrated this principle with his work on neural networks, showing how simple mathematical nodes, when they're connected in large numbers, can learn to recognize images, understand speech, and perform other complicated tasks. Now, this group believes that this mathematical building block approach is the practical path forward for creating artificial intelligence, regardless of whether we're using traditional computers, quantum computers, or other technologies. And their success with deep learning systems, which power many of today's AI applications, gives them a lot of credibility for their perspective. But on the flip side, some researchers advocate for a more complete, big-picture approach to designing AI systems. They warn that breaking everything down into smaller pieces, what we call reductionism, has some very fundamental limitations. Now, this warning stems from the groundbreaking work of Kurt Gödel, an Austrian-American mathematician who, in the 1930s, proved that even in mathematical systems, there are truths that cannot be proven using the rules of that system. And that became known as his incompleteness theorem. This perspective is supported by insights from several influential thinkers across history. Blaise Pascal, a 17th century mathematician and philosopher, argued that reason alone cannot capture all aspects of human experience and knowledge. John von Neumann, a 20th century mathematical genius who helped develop early computers, recognized that complex systems often behave in ways that cannot be predicted by understanding their individual parts. And Immanuel Kant, an 18th century German philosopher, emphasized that human understanding has inherent limitations and that pure logic cannot grasp all aspects of reality. Now, these thinkers are all pointing to a crucial insight, that pure logical reasoning has boundaries and limitations. They suggest that when building AI systems, we need to include broader ways of understanding the world beyond just breaking things down into logical pieces. Relying solely on a reductionist approach, where we try to understand complex things by breaking them into smaller, simpler parts, might lead to AI systems that behave in ways that we didn't expect or want. Now, this debate mirrors how our brains work. The left side of our brain tends to focus on analyzing details and logical thinking, which is similar to the reductionist approach, while the right side is better at seeing the big picture and understanding context, which is similar to the holistic approach. This natural division in our own minds suggests that both approaches might be necessary for true intelligence. So where do these two roads diverge? Our brain hemispheres offer two perspectives on one reality, the universe and everything in it. This division is based on purposes that are tied to our survival. Neurologically, we see what we attend to. When we look at things rationally, we see a rational world. When we look at things holistically, we see meaning. We see these because nature wired our brains this way. There are no guarantees that these views are completely accurate or that they're the only ways to view the world. We see them because they kept our ancestors alive. I should point out here that this also goes back to the debate between empiricism and larger methods of thought, more holistic methods of thought. So if you look at societies that completely reject empiricism, you're talking the Taliban, you're talking leaving rational thought behind, which worked for our hunter-gatherer ancestors and for some people who reject technology entirely. On the other hand, if you reject the holistic approach completely and you end up purely in empirical things that can only be proved in a laboratory, it results in a rejection of faith and meaning. And we see the collapsing birth rates and therefore population collapses of segments of society that only embrace empiricism. There needs to be a balance. Now, we see these two versions of realities because they kept our ancestors alive. Reality is just so overwhelming that our 15-watt brain has to take shortcuts to make sense out of these two views. Nature built two systems for us, and each is imperfect within its own realm. Within us is both a reductionist and a holist. The former provides power and control, the latter offers intuition and meaning and oversees the former. Most AI development, even in emerging brain-inspired models such as Thousand Brains, has been shaped by reductionist thinking. No AI models have right hemisphere functionality because, to a reductionist, everything can be explained with the left, even the right. But nothing in nature exists with only a left hemisphere. If this continues, AI is poised to remain powerful but meaningless, limited by a view of intelligence that only sees pieces. Without a right hemisphere perspective, what will guide these left hemispheric rational buzzsaws? Without meaning and context, what guides actions and behaviors? Max Weber, an influential German sociologist who worked in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, introduced a crucial concept about modern society. He observed that our world was becoming increasingly dominated by calculation, efficiency, and logical reasoning, a process he called rationalization. This trend helped drive remarkable advances in science and technology, as we began breaking down complex problems into logical, manageable pieces that could be solved systematically. And Weber argued that this rationalization was reshaping every aspect of society, from how we organize business to how we think about religion and culture. Instead of relying on tradition, emotion, or intuition, modern societies increasingly demanded logical explanations and measurable outcomes. Think of how a traditional family restaurant might be replicated by a fast food chain where every process is standardized and measured for maximum efficiency. But this highly logical approach seems to conflict with how our brains actually work. Our brains evolved over millions of years to process information in both logical and intuitive ways. Using both precise analysis and broader pattern recognition, when we force ourselves to think only in terms of logic and efficiency, we might be working against our brain's natural balance. Well, this conflict appears most clearly in fields of study that emphasize purely logical thinking. Students in engineering and philosophy programs, which focus heavily on abstract reasoning and breaking things down into their smallest components, show higher rates of certain mental health challenges compared to the general population. Specifically, these students are more likely to experience schizophrenia and related disorders, conditions where a person's perception of reality becomes distorted and fragmented. This troubling pattern suggests that pushing too far toward pure logic and rational analysis, while ignoring our brain's need for intuitive and holistic understanding, might have some unexpected consequences for our mental well-being. And it raises an important question. In our rush to make everything more logical and efficient, have we created an environment that conflicts with the basic way that our minds are designed to work? It's quite a thought, right? In our journey to build remarkable advancements in AI, could reductionism actually lead us astray? It almost seems like history is repeating itself, just as it did with the ancient Greeks and Romans and medieval Europe. Now, here we stand at the crossroads, and which path are we going to choose? On one side, we have the left hemisphere, which focuses intently on the mechanics of our vast universe. This part of our brain tries to make sense of the vastness of the cosmos. It tackles this enormous puzzle with a network of brain cells that's barely bigger than my toddler's shoe. Yet, in all its certainty, it often forgets to step backward and acknowledge that there might be a bigger picture that it's missing. On the other side, the right hemisphere takes a different approach. It embraces the whole, choosing not to dissect or control it. This part appreciates the finer details, but it leaves them to the left to deal with. Instead, it marvels at the universe as it is, watching all of its wonders unfold. How fascinating is it that we exist in such a grand cosmos? Both perspectives have their merits and limitations, and they engage in a beautiful interplay, sometimes collaborating, sometimes competing, and they enrich our understanding of life. And together, these sides of our brain create music, develop scientific theories, nurture love, advance technology, navigate conflict, solve math problems, and inspire art. Just like us, they're imperfect, but through their combined efforts, they help shape a curious understanding of reality and how intelligence is intricately woven into it. As we've seen, the story of our divided brain is really the story of two fundamental ways of understanding the world. The left hemisphere brings us the power of analysis, reduction, and control, the very qualities that have driven our technological revolution. The right hemisphere provides context, meaning, and the bigger picture that gives everything a purpose. Nature, in its profound wisdom, never created a living brain with only one of these perspectives. But here we stand, at a pivotal moment in human history, developing artificial intelligence systems that reflect only half of their essential duality. The question before us isn't whether we can create powerful artificial intelligence. We've already crossed that bridge. The question is whether we can create artificial intelligence that understands not just the how of intelligence, but also the why. The path we choose now, whether to continue down the road of pure reductionism or to embrace a more balanced approach, may well determine whether artificial intelligence becomes a tool that enriches human understanding or one that diminishes it.